Well, welcome everyone. We're right at 2 o'clock, so I'd like for us to get started. And as always, let's start with a word of prayer. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for this day. And I thank you for times of rest and times of Sabbath, for times of work and times of being together in fellowship. So be with us this afternoon. Bless it this time together. And continue to bless the ministry of this church. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, welcome to all of you who are here in Stevenson Hall, and also a welcome to all those who are with us online and on Zoom. It will be recorded later on, so there may be a number of folks who will watch it later on. But it's great to have the technology to be able to do that and to have you all here with me. I'm planning, there is some water and some popcorn over here. I am planning to take a 5-minute break. When I timed it all out, it was about 45 minutes, but I didn't pause for looking at pictures or questions. So I thought it might be good just to have a 5-minute break to break it up a little bit and give you a chance to stretch. Also over here, I just have some things from my study and from Chautauqua and from Scotland. It's not much, but it's a few things that you can take a look at, the books that I used during the break or afterwards. Well, first of all, I can't thank you enough, and I can't thank you, and as many times as I thank you, it's not enough, for giving me the gift of this sabbatical. It has been a wonderful time of rejuvenating and of rest. And after 2 years of being your pastor during COVID, it's hard enough being a pastor, but I have to tell you that for me and a lot of my colleagues, you never thought that you would have to be both a pastor and a chief medical officer at the same time, but that's what we needed to do. So to share with this, a sabbatical, according to the Office of the General Assembly, is a planned time of intensive enhancement for ministry and mission. The biblical concept is grounded in the idea of Sabbath time, a time of rest. Your sabbatical is different from a vacation. It is meant for the time for the pastor to disengage from normal tasks so that ministry might be viewed from a new perspective. It's also different from an academical sabbatical where there's an expectation that that person will produce something, a book or a research paper or a publication of some sort of like that. It wasn't common actually for pastors to get sabbaticals until I would say about 20 years ago, maybe 25. But now it's recommended by the PCUSA, and it is something that is recommended in our calls for the PIVA, the Presbyterian of Eastern Virginia now. The National Clergy Renewal Grant is a program funded by the Lilly Endowment. It is a non-denominational grant. They only award 125 grants per year, and that's with all denominations, not just Presbyterian. So it is quite competitive. The administration ministry and I worked together on our grant proposal, and our application was accepted, as you may know. So WPC received the grant money that paid for my travel and my family's travel, as well as for our lodging, for our food, and for tickets to events that we were on. It also paid for Pastor Don's compensation while he was here, while I was away. So that didn't come out of the WPC budget either, but rather came from the grant money. The program says that the National Clergy Renewal Grant says that it seeks to strengthen Christian congregations by providing opportunities for pastors to step away briefly from the persistent obligations of daily parish life to engage in a period of renewal and reflection. So this is, share with you the rationale. This was part of the narrative for the grant application and the rationale for my sabbatical. For most of my ministry, I have been preaching from pulpits during the colonial, I've been preaching from pulpits established during the colonial period. To preach in Williamsburg, Virginia means the 18th century is just 2 blocks away. On Duke of Gloucester Street, reenactors debate the formation of our nation while fife and drum corps march by. I've been fascinated by the preachers who were part of this grand experiment of US democracy. I served my first pastorate in Caldwell, New Jersey, named after Reverend James Caldwell, who left the pulpit to fight in the Battle of Springfield. I recall seeing a statue of John Witherspoon near Princeton Seminary, the only clergy to sign the Declaration of Independence. And during my pastorate at First Presbyterian Church of York, I explored where the Continental Congress met and finalized the Articles of Confederation in 1777. One of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, James Smith, was a member of that congregation and of the Continental Congress. And he was buried in the churchyard of that church. I imagine Mr. Smith inviting Reverend Witherspoon to join him for worship while the Congress met in York, Pennsylvania. Historian Spencer McBride notes that the Revolutionary War was deeply influenced by these clergymen. We live in a time when pulpit and politics are in a difficult tension. Recent Pew Research noted that at the same time America's lament over the loss of influence of religion in their public life, they do not want to hear politics from the pulpit. And I found this true for many in my congregation. In this renewal time, I'd like to explore international, regional, and local history and culture to gain insights regarding our founders and see what colonial preachers have to teach us about politics and the pulpit today. This kind of reflection is, of course, difficult to do while leading an active congregation and a large staff. So by stepping out of the pulpit, I'll be able to explore how these revolutionary preachers from different regions influenced a nation and evaluate how my preaching might inspire people to see their faith and politics intertwined. After 35, now it's 38 years of leading historic churches, I feel the cumulative weight of constant ministry. And this sabbatical is important in order to refuel my energy for this later stage of my ministry and continue to serve at my full capacity. My sabbatical journey will include focus on exploration, contemplation, rest, and deepening family relationships. So at the end of April, I met with Pastor Don to hand off the ministry to his good hands, put an away message on my email, and you can't imagine how freeing that is, just not to answer email. And on May 1, began to disengage and relax. One of the experiences of a sabbatical affords is the opportunity to worship with other communities. So it made sense for me to start with Bruton Parish. I've been there for concerts and other things, but I've never been there for morning worship. So it was good to worship with that community. I met with Reverend Chris Epperson, the rector, later on in my sabbatical to just chat with him about his parish and its colonial connections. I set some important spiritual practices during my sabbatical time. A centering prayer, which is a form of contemplative prayer, daily journaling, exercise, reading, and study. These were the grounded activities for my sabbatical time. The highlight of my time really was our family trip to Italy. We didn't travel much as a family, so this was a wonderful experience for Ellen, Grace, Erica, and her husband, Marcello, all to be on this trip. I have to admit that air travel was a challenge. And that this was still when COVID testing was required both to leave and to come back. So that was just a tension for all of that. But except for an aborted landing in Florence, we were trying to come down and they had to abort and come back around again because there's too much wind. But we did finally land, and everyone applauded when the pilot landed, and we made it safely to Italy. And just by the way, the places we went, we were in Florence, Frienza. We spent some time in Lucca, and we had a quick trip to Livorno in our time. So, let me find myself. We went to our apartment. The apartment that we had was in the very center of the city, and this is from the rooftop of the porch of the place where we stayed. And that is the Cathedral of Firenze, the Duomo. The food was fabulous, as you might imagine. We started our first night with a recommendation from our hostess, her favorite restaurant, Trattoria Zaza. And I have to say that for all the time we were in Italy, we did not have a bad meal. It was good. Florence, as many of you know, is the center for art. And we wanted to take in as many museums as we could. The first was the Uffizi. The Uffizi has a wonderful collection of Botticelli, including this very famous one I'm sure you've all seen, the Birth of Venus. Michelangelo, as you may know, also painted and sculpted in Florence, and we saw many of his works, including this one of the Holy Family. Leonardo da Vinci, also there, and this Annunciation by him was magnificent. This was a huge painting. It was much larger. It was larger than even what's on the screen here, and just beautiful to see the detail on that. The Coronation of Mary by Lorenzo Monaca really emphasized for us and for me the Catholic themes and the influences of art in Italy, and especially in the Renaissance. We lost track of the number of paintings of Madonna and Child that we saw, and all the altar triptychs that were also in the museums. There were just too many to be able to count. And it really opened my eyes to the Roman Catholic influence in that country and its society and culture. Coming from a Protestant background, I never heard of the Coronation of Mary. When did that happen? It's not in the Bible, but somehow they decided to paint this, and it really highlighted the influence of the church in that culture. On Sunday, the Cathedral Duomo was not open for worship. I'm not sure if that was just because of COVID or whatever, but we asked around and we found the Basilica of Mary Novella. There were ushers at the door, making sure that you weren't coming in just to sightsee in the church, but that you were there for Mass. And we convinced the ushers that yes, we were here to worship and for Mass. And it was a beautiful church and basilica, and everything was in Italian, as you might imagine. But we could sing the Gloria. That's a part that we knew and could sing along with it. But what a wonderful worship there. That Sunday afternoon, we had tickets for the other major gallery, the Accademia di Firenze. And I have to tell you, no matter how many pictures you see of Michelangelo's sculpture of David, there's just no way to capture the grandeur and the beauty of this sculpture. It is fabulous. We spent so much time just taking that in, and its height and its intricacy. It is a huge sculpture. We also really enjoyed, there were these 3D busts of Michelangelo. They had done some digital pictures of it and then created these so you could take a look at them from different angles. And it was a very three-dimensional display, and it was amazing. Even his unfinished sculpture room was just fantastic to see the things that Michelangelo didn't get a chance to finish in his lifetime. On Monday was our tour of the cathedral known as Duomo, which is the Italian word for cathedral, as you might imagine. When it was built in 1420, it was the largest dome in the world. And interestingly, today it is still the fourth largest dome in the world, and it was built in 1420. Amazing. This is the chancel that's under the dome. The fresco on the dome is an amazing depiction of the Last Judgment by Giorgio Vasari in 1572 and completed after his death by Federico Zuccari in 1579. Initially, it was commissioned by the Grand Duke Cosimo de' Medici. Before he was exiled from Florence, Dante, who wrote the Inferno, was also a native of Florence, and this was a picture of him in the Duomo. Again, significant to recognize the Roman Catholic influence and the influence of Dante's work on many of our conceptions of heaven and hell. A lot of what we think about heaven and hell didn't come from the Bible, but came from Dante. We love local markets, and the Central Market of Florence did not disappoint us whatsoever. We had with wonderful shopping, local culture, and of course, more eating. We walked over the Ponte Vecchio. I probably screwed it. What is Vecchio? Thank you. I knew I would mess that up. Bridge, which is filled with shops and only pedestrian traffic. So that's a beautiful, if you've ever been there, it's all the shops along the way there. Our destination was the Boboli Gardens on the other side of the Arno River. The gardens are beautiful. You climb up a number of terraces. This is only looking down at Firenze from halfway up. There are hundreds of steps to get to the garden at the very top of the hill. We were all wondering if it was worth it, but as you reach the last step, there was the spectacular view of the quintessential Italian countryside from a beautiful garden. I sat on the bench right there by that gate just to listen to the gasps of people as they got to the top and saw this just exquisite view and all the beauty that was there. The next day, we had lunch at a little hidden away restaurant called Butter Chicken, and it was the best chicken I've ever had, just drenched in bubbling butter. It was great. But then that afternoon was Pasta Mania with Chef Julio Wilson, and that's him there. We made our pasta dough. We rolled it out. We shaped it. We filled it, and then it was cooked and covered, and we ate our own creations with our chef. It was wonderful. Wednesday was back to the Central Market to do some shopping for balsamic vinegar and truffle oil and mushrooms that we brought home with us. Then lunch at La Menagerie. It's a beautiful place. Dinner that evening was at Trattoria Gorga. As you know, just before our trip, we found out that Erica was pregnant. And we couldn't resist taking this picture of her next to the pregnant statue. May 12th was our travel day to the Tuscany countryside. On our way, we stopped at a vineyard, an olive grove for some wine tasting and olive tasting. We did ship back a few bottles of wine. Erica especially wanted to ship back some wine because she couldn't drink any of the wine while we were there in Italy because she was pregnant. So she's waiting until the baby's born, and then some corks are going to be coming out. That afternoon, we arrived at Cosimo's village outside of Lucca. And I'm just going to share this video with you. This is the villa that we had in Tuscany. And this is walking down towards the natural pool. No chlorine in this. In fact, there were plants along the side growing in the pool, and you can hear the frog. There's a frog in there too. So in back, there's a little gazebo back in the other side that right there, and that's where we had our dinner that I'll talk about in a minute. That was the villa. So one of the things that I've said is the first part of our journey, we went to visit museums, and the second part of our journey, we lived in museums. This was the living room there, and the kitchen. And then this was our dinner. Cosimo is a chef. He cooks in France during the winter, but comes back to this family villa in the spring and summer. And we contracted with him to cook us dinner. It was fantastic. It was down by that natural pool. And we just had a wonderful time eating there. Again, more wonderful food. On Friday, we traveled to the city of Lucca. It is the only Italian walled city with all of its walls still intact. You can actually take a bike ride around the top of the walls there. And it was beautiful. That's the piazza in the very center of Lucca. On Saturday, we took the trip to Livorno, which is on the Mediterranean coast. And it's a modern city, actually. It is one of the major shipping ports of Italy. The ocean view was underwhelming, to say the least. We were not too thrilled about it. Yeah. But we discovered this little part of town called the New Venice. So they had these canals where you could get around, no gondolas, just motorboats, but it was still nice. And our main goal of going there also was to find some great seafood, and we were not disappointed. But then after all that wonderful time there, it was time for us to come home. On Sunday, May 22nd, we worshiped, again, another experience. We worshiped with our daughters at their church at New York Avenue Presbyterian Church in Washington, DC. Another benefit of having Sunday off. You can actually worship with your family. We also, on this trip, went to Old Town, where they had a speed and style show, a car show and fashion show in Old Town Alexandria. And we also celebrated Grace's 30th birthday that weekend as well. Part of the family time plan for my sabbatical was to spend some quality time with Ellen as well. We went to Charleston, North Carolina for 4 days of sightseeing. And of course, great eating of Southern food as well. And we celebrated our 39th anniversary, wedding anniversary there. It was very meaningful to worship that Sunday at Mother Emanuel Church, AME Church in Charleston. This was the church where on June 17th, 2015, a mass shooting occurred in which 9 African-American church members were killed during a Bible study. Among those people were killed were the senior pastor and state senator Clemente Pinckney. We went downstairs and happened upon this memorial to the Emmanuel 9, the 9 who were killed. There in that basement, right there was where they had the Bible study, where it happened. So they were welcoming, so inviting to us. It was a wonderful congregation, and we really enjoyed being with them on that Sunday. June 1 through 5 was my time set aside to explore Colonial Williamsburg. After living here 9 years, I never really went into the venues. I mean, we walked down Dog Street, but to go in and take advantage of the educational speakers, I hadn't taken the time to. So I went to watch brick makers and toured the Capitol. I went to the Nation Maker talk with George Wythe, spent time in the Palace Gardens. Had an interesting tour of the Freedom Paradox, which was a tour that talked about the enslaved in Williamsburg and the paradox that in this place of freedom that over 50% of the population was enslaved during that time. I really enjoyed, Ellen and I went to the Nation Maker talk by Gowan Pamphlet. He was the founder, and that's who's pictured here. He was the founder of what we now know as First Baptist Church, historic First Baptist Church, the first church organized in the country by enslaved and free Blacks. He talked about the importance of the Great Awakening, and we got a chance to speak with him one-on-one after his lecture. And he agreed that it was the influence of the Great Awakening and preachers like Reverend Samuel Davies who set the stage for independence in our nation. We also went in this time to see the Hearth Memorial that was just completed at William and Mary. And on Sunday, June 5th, we worshiped there at the historic First Baptist Church. So we've been about 35 minutes in. The next section is going to be my pulpit and politics. So let's just take a 5-minute break to stretch, help yourself to water and popcorn, and take a look, and we'll gather together and continue on. But I want to break it up a little bit here. So thanks for your attention so far. And those online, just hold on. We'll be with you in a minute.
Red soup. Oh, you definitely changed it.
We spent 3.5 years in Italy, and we spent a lot of time. We were doing Sabbatical when they chose Elizabeth to be a saint.
Okay.
And there you got like 7 o'clock in the morning. It was amazing.
Okay. Yeah, you were there for 2 years.
3.5 years, and we spent as much time as we could. We spent a lot of time in Rome. You know, I always said that all the roads were
I think you're right. That's great. I'm glad.
Thank you for doing this tonight. It's
Oh,
great.
you're welcome.
Sorry I was late. For some reason, I thought you were going to start at 4 instead of 2.
Oh, sorry, I'm glad you got
I'm
here.
here. Thank you.
Okay, let's keep going here, if you would. But I'm always thankful for your fellowship with one another and your chats. It's always great to share these experiences, and many of you have shared your experiences with me of your travels as well. That's one of the fun things. You get to relive it and think about it. So here's the research part. So this is the lecture part, not just the travelogue part, about pulpit and politics. And you know that was my theme and what I was looking into. And as I mentioned, what led me to this connection to colonial churches started actually with, and this, by the way, is a picture painting of James Caldwell, who I'll talk about in a little. But this is the Battle of Springfield and him giving them hymnals to use for batting. But it started actually with my father, who was an associate pastor at Neshaminy Warwick Presbyterian Church in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. It happened to be the place where William Tennant founded his church. Matt Slack is actually related in some way to William Tennant, and we've shared some stories about him. But William Tennant founded the first theological seminary in the United States for Presbyterians in 1727, called the Log College. And he founded that church in Neshaminy, Warwick, and he's actually buried there as well. In 1739, Log College alumni Samuel Blair, Samuel Finney, Gilbert Tennant, and William Tennant Jr. would become among the first trustees to form the newly formed College of New Jersey, later to become Princeton, both seminary, and then they split the seminary and university. And as you know, I went to Princeton Theological Seminary for my Master's of Divinity, and Reverend John Witherspoon, the revolutionary pastor who signed the Declaration of Independence, was the 6th president of the College of New Jersey. There's a statue of him on the campus of Princeton with the inscription, "Patriot, Preacher, President." My first call to ministry then was to the First Presbyterian Church at Caldwell, in Caldwell, New Jersey. The town was named after Reverend James Caldwell, who left his pulpit to fight in the Revolutionary War. The middle school, actually, their mascot are the Fighting Parson. There you go. But actually, Caldwell was born in Charlotte County, Virginia, and his father was given permission to preach as a dissenting minister in Virginia. So he grew up with dissenting ministers. Caldwell graduated from Princeton in 1759. He was pastor in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and on April 1st, 1776, he became the chaplain of the 3rd New Jersey Battalion. The British actually at that point put a bounty on his head. And in January of 1780, they burned his home and the church to the ground. On June 7, a redcoat shot his wife, Hannah, through the window of their home. They drug her body outside, set fire to the house. The neighbors saved their children, and after burying his wife's body, he placed the children in care of parishioners, and he rushed back to the army. At the Battle of Springfield, the soldiers in his battalion ran out of wadding for their guns. Caldwell went to the Presbyterian church, grabbed armloads of hymnals written by Isaac Watts. He gave them to the soldiers, shouting, "Give them Watts, boys, give them Watts." On November 24, 1781, 15 months after the battle, he went to Elizabethtown Point to assist a woman arriving by boat. As he was leaving the vessel, a guard ordered him to stop. He did, but the guard shot him anyway. Many said that the guard, James Morgan, had been bribed by the British to shoot him. Morgan was tried and hung. So there's some of what it gets you with pulpit and politics. My next church was in St. Paul, Minnesota. That's another whole story. We're not going to go into that. But after St. Paul, I was called to First Presbyterian Church in York, Pennsylvania. The Continental Congress met in the courthouse in York to write and adopt the Articles of Confederation of the United States. John Witherspoon was a delegate from New Jersey, and he led the one state, one vote debate versus John Adams, who wanted the vote to be proportional to the population of the states. One of the other signers of Declaration of Independence, in addition to Witherspoon, was an organizer and also an organizer of the Army in Pennsylvania was James Smith. James Smith was a lawyer. He was a member of the Presbyterian Church in York. And as I mentioned, I imagine him inviting Reverend Witherspoon to join him at worship. Every year I prayed at the grave of James Smith in the churchyard with the James Smith chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. And on July 4th, they'd always place a wreath on his grave there. On November 15th, 1777, the Articles of Confederation were adopted in York. And then the Congress continued to do their business from that courthouse until 1778. Now, in a York history book, which is actually over there, Crucible of a New Nation, it says this, quote, "The national capital in the town of York, Pennsylvania, which on the same basis lays just and lasting claim to the title of the first capital of the United States." Now, you know that this was debated. There was actually many first capitals in the United States, but this was a sense of pride for the Yorkers, and of course, a debate with New Yorkers who claimed that the first capital was actually in New York in 1789 when the Constitution was ratified and George Washington was inaugurated. But they still call themselves first capital in York, Pennsylvania. It's also the first place where a National Declaration of Thanksgiving by George Washington was held. It wasn't the usual, but it was just a day of Thanksgiving that he declared in York. Well, then in 2013, I was called here to Williamsburg, in many ways, the birthplace of our nation and an interpreter of colonial life and in our living museum here. Although Williamsburg was dominated by the Church of England, Lewis Weeks, I think you folks know Dr. Weeks, in an article for the Presbyterian Historical Society, makes a case that the Reverend Robert Hunt, the chaplain of the London Company that came to Jamestown on the Goodspeed, Discovery, and St. Constant, was part of the Presbyterian movement in England and the first clergy to offer prayer and worship in Virginia. So according to Lewis, the first person offering that was a Presbyterian, the Presbyterian movement in the Church of England. We do know that Reverend Francis McCamey came to the Eastern Shore and was also seen as the father of Presbyterian in the colonies. He started Presbyterian churches all up and down the East Coast and was very dynamic and influential. Christopher Pearl, in his article for the Journal of Presbyterian History, wrote, Presbyterian clergy played an important role in America's founding by providing their congregants with crucial political and religious ideas that served as the guiding sentiment of the Revolution. Published and unpublished sermons by Presbyterian ministers with congregations throughout the 13 colonies show that the clergy embraced and expounded Enlightenment principles that informed revolutionaries as they declared independence from Britain. From the pulpit, ministers schooled their congregation about the state of nature, natural law, and the origins of civil society, and the role and purposes of government. Importantly, they even taught their flocks the limits of obedience and the right of resistance, and even revolution, end quote. The Scottish Enlightenment that he refers to and its philosophy, I do think, was critical in the promoting of the revolution and creating a separate government. John Witherspoon, very influenced by it, and also he was a passionate evangelical. One tenet of the Enlightenment was natural law. Pearl again writes, at creation, ministers argued, God established a known law, God's law, which outlined the individual's social responsibilities to the larger community to ensure happiness and safety for everyone, end quote. During my sabbatical time here in Colonial Williamsburg, I spent time with the nation builders and Reverend Gowan Pamphlet, a Baptist preacher. And in my conversation with him after the lecture, he also felt strongly that it was the lasting effects of the Great Awakening led by preachers such as Samuel Davies, another Presbyterian pastor, very involved in the Polgreen Church, if you're familiar with that, that inspired the colonists to break from Britain and create their own nation. The Great Awakening, you see, was a movement towards a more personal, individualized faith instead of the institutional membership in the Church of England. So I believe that the Great Awakening, with its personalized individual understanding of our faith, along with the Scottish Enlightenment that held up God's natural law as opposed to other law and the other things that played into the Enlightenment, played into a significant part of the revolution that came from colonial clergy and many Presbyterian. And I think Presbyterian, again, because they were dissenters, because they were always very passionate about keeping separate in Scotland from the Church of England. I think all of those things led to the Presbyterian clergy leading us towards a revolution. The most informative book that I studied, it was fascinating, and I would recommend it if you're interested, was Pulpit and Nation, Clergymen and the Politics of the Revolutionary War by Spencer W. McBride. He notes that the role and relationship of religion and politics has been debated from the very beginning of our country, and that there has never been a consensus on the balance between the two. He points out in one of his chapters about the declaring of national feast days, and these happened in the revolution with the Continental Congress. The first one was declared by Thomas Jefferson, believe it or not, in 1774, and the first from the Continental Congress in 1775 by John Adams. McBride writes, by proclaiming fast days, Congress was inviting American clergymen to engage with the public on this national campaign to forge a sense of unity, end quote. McBride also looked in to the role of chaplains. Chaplains both to the Congress and Continental Congress, and also chaplains that were appointed to the Continental Army, like James Caldwell. He said that Army chaplains, quote, main role in the British Army was to prepare men to face death and to bolster their courage. But in addition to these duties, several congressional delegates and military officers, including George Washington, expected American chaplains to work as agents of moral reform in turning the Continental Army into a professional force, and urged them to further project to the soldiers the idea of a new American army was a modern army of Israel. But perhaps most importantly, revolutionary leaders expected the chaplains to shoulder a large part of the burden of keeping Americans in the war, end quote. There were a lot of desertion that was going on during the revolution, and they hoped that the chaplains would help to keep them in and encourage them to stay in the fight. Now, George Washington, this is McBride says, was disgusted by the profanity and gambling of his troops. And he petitioned Congress for more chaplains and that they require them to go to worship to cure these vices from the soldiers. He wanted more chaplains to clean up the behavior of his troops. So McBride also says that the Continental Congress also had chaplains from the very beginning, but that they turned daily prayer into a political ritual. Their purpose for prayer before the meeting was to, quote, promote civil discourse, reinforce the revolution's religious symbolism, and urge greater unity of the colonists, end quote. Now, McBride saw the clergy also taking advantage of this situation as well. They wanted to get an inside track and believing that this would help them to reestablish an important role in society where the social elites, as you may know at that time, were deists, and the influence of the church was waning in those colonial times. So they saw this as an opportunity to jump on the bandwagon and get their influence back. So in regard to relationship of religion and politics, McBride comments, quote, in this moment, we see the emergence of a peculiar and enduring pattern in American political culture. When secular factions believe clergy are on their side, they champion their participation in political processes as legitimate and even essential. But when the tables are turned, the same factions declare clerical participation in politics as an unholy alliance between church and state, end quote. So finally, in this part, let me share this quote from McBride's conclusion, which I think is just revealing. We can credit the founders then with initiating the enduring American tradition of mixing religion and politics while simultaneously debating the proper balance of the two. But why do 21st century Americans care so deeply about the role religion played in the political processes that created the United States? Can all the heated arguments over the issue really be about finding the, quote, correct or intended degree of separation of church and state? Surely the crux of the issue lies deeper than a fight over if and when political leaders can pray publicly or comment on religious-based morals. Indeed, the issue's full historical context tells us that there is much more to the equation than the simple pragmatic questions of proper role of religion should play in the country's political sphere. The clamor and passion the 21st century Americans exhibit in their public debate over the relationship of religion to politics during the nation's founding era is indicative of a far more personal internal conflict. At its core, it is an identity issue. For better or for worse, we are tied to our identity, to our past. I'll have questions at the very end, but that concludes my politics and pulpit. But I thought I'd pause here to see if there was any questions about this part of the presentation. So nothing settled. It's still a mix and a mess. And all it really told me was there was a mess from the very beginning, and we just have made it into a tradition of doing that. All right, we'll keep going then. So the next part of my journey was to explore my family heritage in Edinburgh, Scotland. The flat that I rented was near the university's old school and just a few blocks from the Royal Mile. This is the Royal Mile looking down toward the sea, if you have ever been there. One day, I hiked up to the top of the Salisbury Crags to overlook and see the city. I didn't go all the way up to Arthur's Seat. That's the Arthur's Seat there that goes, that's way up high. I just went to the crags. But it's an extinct volcano that overlooks the old town in Edinburgh. On the Royal Mile, up toward the castle and behind New College, I found this marker for the Scottish General Assembly, where the Scottish General Assembly met of the Presbyterian Church. On the front of the new college, there's the new college, which is the divinity school of the University of Edinburgh. I also found a plaque there that's on this, the new college, University of Edinburgh, in honor of Reverend John Witherspoon, signatory American delegation of the Independents, President College of New Jersey, Princeton, graduate of the university. I actually met with one of the archivists in the new school and was talking with her, and she didn't know this plaque was out there. So I told her about it. She said, wow, do you know what it takes to get a plaque on a building in Edinburgh? So somebody went to a great effort to get this on there, but that was one of my goals, is to find that plaque. On June 11th, I toured the National Museum of Scotland and just stayed there most of the day. Half of the whole museum tells the story of the inhabitants of Scotland from the very beginning to the current day. It takes you from the Celtic carved stone crosses to many of the Presbyterian pulpits. It told them, this is actually a pulpit a portable pulpit they would use for outdoor revivals. So they would move this around for outdoor revivals. I think this one is, I think that's St. Andrews, the pulpit from St. Andrews. So it was just wonderful to look and hear the story of some of my amazing ancestors in Scotland. It was wonderful. I spent so much time there. On Sunday, I worshiped in St. Giles Cathedral, the High Kirk of Scotland. You may have seen this view with Queen Elizabeth, who lay there in state after she died. When I was there, there was an American associate pastor who was preaching his last Sunday and then coming back to the States. And he was coming back to Washington, D.C. So I went up and greeted him afterwards and wanted to tell him about the church where my daughters were. He said, oh, New York Avenue Presbyterian Church. He says, the senior pastor, Reverend Cullen McLeod, he knows the pastor that was just called to New York Avenue Presbyterian Church. They worked together in Chicago. So I went to meet Colum, and he said, oh, please tell Sarah next time you see her. And actually, I saw Sarah at Erica's baby shower just a couple of weeks ago, and just told her about Colum. And it was great to make that connection. So we made this Presbyterian connection less than 6 degrees of separation. Absolutely. Our nephew-in-law, Josh Boker, is from Edinburgh, and he studied art history there. And he suggested that I go to the National Art Gallery. And this was a picture from his favorite exhibition, Poussin's Seven Sacraments. Now, Poussin's a French painter, but they had one room, that was a circular room, and they had the 7 sacraments all in that one room. So it was one of the best art exhibits I've ever seen. To be able to sit there and look at all of the different depictions he did. This is repentance. This is the one on repentance. So all of them were set in Jesus' time, the 7 sacraments. This is the woman anointing Jesus' feet that he painted. It was wonderful. They had lots of great art. One of the other fun ones is the skating minister. So this was a minister in Edinburgh that joined the skating club, and somebody painted his picture. It's one of those famous paintings there. The next day I went to Carlton Park, and it's on the other side from the crags overlooking the city. And it was a beautiful view of the city. And this is the National Scottish Monument, the pillars in the background there. There's some story about them. This monument was never really finished. So there are some who had some discouraging things to say about the monument, about not getting it finished. But anyway, it was beautiful up there. So one of the personal meaningful times for me was when I walked to 13 Lochran Terrace. That's the blue door right there. That is the place where my great-great-grandparents lived when they were in Edinburgh. So my parents have an oil portrait of my great-grandparents, and the story is that they were painted by a set designer. This is not too far away. This is the Lyceum Theatre in Edinburgh, and that the oil paintings that they have were painted by a set designer here in exchange for haircuts that my great-great-grandfather gave to the staff at the theater. We don't have really documentation of that, but that's the story, so we're going with it. So, of course, you can't go to Edinburgh without touring Edinburgh Castle. And as you know, it is just an impressive fortress built on the remains of an extinct volcano as well. The crane there, they were actually replacing all of the theater seating for the tattoo. If you've ever been there, brand new seats all going in there. So I'm not sure what the old ones were like, but they look pretty good. But it wasn't open yet for the tattoo. This was up on the castle. This is the Hall of Armor that was there as well. So the next day, it was my last day, and I attempted to get to the National Archives to do some family research, but I couldn't get in because of COVID. They had such restrictions there that there were people who were waiting months just to get an appointment to come in and do some research. But that afternoon, I met Dr. Jolyn Mitchell at New College, and Dr. Mitchell was the PhD supervisor for our nephew, Josh, when he was studying there. And Dr. Mitchell teaches at the Divinity School, and his expertise is in dealing with violence in religion. And he had just gotten back from a meeting with church leaders in Ukraine. So we had a great conversation and lunch together. He gave me a tour. This is the Great Hall of the New College. And another disappointment, the library was being renovated and I couldn't get in to see the library. And Josh told me that was his favorite in all of the university libraries. The one at New College was his favorite. So the next morning I began my long, arduous trip home, and I'm not going to go into those details, except to say that on June 17th, I tested positive for COVID after going through all the airports. And by this time, you didn't have to test to get on the plane for my return, which meant that everybody could get on positive without being negative. So anyway, that meant I had to cancel trips to the Presbyterian Historical Society in Philadelphia, and also back to Princeton to do some exploration of John Witherspoon. Instead, I stayed quarantined, did a lot of reading. Thankfully, Ellen did not get sick at all. I was abolished to the downstairs, but it's what worked. And those two things, those are part of any parts of the trip. Those are ones I can do on another time for a continuing ed to go to Philadelphia and Princeton. So if I had to miss any, that was a good one. All right, we're getting there. On June 26th, we went to worship at First Presbyterian Church in Virginia Beach. I've always wanted to worship there. It's a neat church right down at the beach, and the worship was wonderful. The pastor is so welcoming there. And the other reason, however, was we wanted to celebrate the end of quarantine by going down and sitting on the beach. So we spent the rest of the afternoon on the beach and just had a wonderful time there. Well, in July, we headed to our favorite place, Chautauqua Institution. This is a picture actually of my bike outside of the Hall of Philosophy, looking up the hill. The darker roof up there is the Hall of Philosophy. The historian and author David McCullough, who we heard lecture at Chautauqua several times, who unfortunately died just this past August. He said of Chautauqua, "There is no place like it, no resort, no spa. It is at once a summer encampment, a small town, a college campus, an arts colony, a music festival, a religious retreat, and the village square." All those things wrapped up into one. I'm currently the vice president of the Presbyterian Association of Chautauqua, which runs this beautiful guest house, which is a wonderful place to stay. And any of you, if you'd like to go to Chautauqua, you can sign up and stay there. There's about room for about 60 guests each week, and you usually go for a week when you go there. But the other ministry of the Presbyterian House, which is right next to the amphitheater where all the lectures are held, is we give coffee. We have free coffee for anyone in between morning worship and the 10:45 lecture on the themes. So it's a great place to meet people and doing good Presbyterian hospitality there at Chautauqua. So during our 3 weeks there, we went to worship every day except Saturdays. They didn't have worship on Saturdays. But I heard 6 sermons each from Reverend Randy Bush, a Presbyterian pastor, Reverend Michael Ray Matthews from Faith in Action in California, and Father Greg Boyle from Homeboy Industries in California, which runs a gang rehabilitation group there. You may not know, but I volunteer with the religion department, and for around 25 years, I've been a liturgist for a week at the Department of Religion and at worship. And this is from the webcast or the cast. They do this online from week two when I was there with liturgist with Michael Ray Matthews this summer. So it was fun to be able to do that. And we got Williamsburg Presbyterian Church on the Chautauqua publicity there. So this is the amphitheater. Morning lectures are centered around a theme of the week. Week 2, which was our first week there, was the wild, reconnecting with our natural world. So every day that during the 1045 lecture, it was about reconnecting with our natural world. One of the speakers was Sally Jewell, who was the former US Secretary of the Interior, who spoke. Week 3 was about the future of human rights. And the highlight of that week's lectures was Nadia Murad, who was a Nobel Peace Prize winner, who was kidnapped in Iraq when she was a girl, and now works for women's rights in Iraq from Germany. And she won the Nobel Peace Prize for that. Week 4 was the future of history. And here pictured is one of those lectures. This was John Meacham. Many of you may know him. He's a historian and writer, Pulitzer Prize winning author and historian there on the stage. The religion department also sponsors lectures that intersect with religion and the theme in the afternoon. And this is at the Hall of Philosophy. It's all open air. It's Roman Gothic pavilion there. It's just a wonderful place. And while we were there, I heard this is a picture of Marilyn Robinson. Many of you may know her novels, the Gilead series. And she did a wonderful lecture. Also, I heard there John Philip Newell, who was the director of the Iona community in Scotland. And he was there talking about, that was during the natural world, and he was talking about our connection with creation. Just one of his books is over there from Celtic Christianity. Now, just to give you, I can't incorporate everything from our time, but just a few musical entertainments and entertainment offerings that we had during just our 3 weeks. We heard Sheryl Crow, we heard ABBA, we heard the Raleigh Ringers, and we heard Jay Leno. So you can't get much more eclectic to that than that. And that is just in addition to the 9 symphony concerts we heard and a night of ballet. There's also live theater that we went to one evening as well. So this is Yale Cottage. We have a 2-bedroom condominium. We've had it there since 1989. It's our home away from home, and it's the place where our daughters have joined us almost every year of their lives. So no matter where we were in a church, every summer we were here. Sorry about that. So preparing to return. We had about a week home, maybe a week and a half before I got back to church. It was a time to reflect and prepare for the reentry. We had a warm welcome at the Williamsburg United Methodist Church, another place we got to worship, and our finally Sunday worship at St. Stephen's Lutheran Church. So we just went around and visiting our other churches here. We also attended a program at historic First Baptist Church on racism, and they had the authors of the book, Not So Black and White. And that was very informative, and I appreciate what First Baptist is doing there in our community. I took some time to spend with my parents in Pennsylvania. I don't think I had seen them since COVID, so I went up to see them and had some time with them as well. So I believe the sabbatical accomplished what I hoped for and beyond my expectations. I'm glad to be back refreshed and renewed. This is a picture of my new electric bike. I've been riding it to church and commuting with my electric bike instead of driving these days as many times as I can. And then on the other side, once we got back, Leon Looney and Ruth Ann Penberthy. Leon has taken Ellen and I out to dinner every year on the anniversary of our coming to Williamsburg since we've gotten here. We had to postpone it to August because I was away in June, which is the anniversary. But this was dinner with Leon on the eve of his 100th birthday. And he's doing great. He's doing fantastic. So again, I can't thank you enough. It has been wonderful and a blessing to have this sabbatical. I feel renewed and ready for the next part of this ministry with all of you. And it's a joy to be able to share this with you. And I'm so glad for your presence here and look forward to more fruitful ministry together. If you have any other questions about any part of the trip or presentation, I'd be happy to answer them. And I could even see if there's anybody on Zoom. I wonder if I lost my Zoom. Well, anyway, any questions? All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Go in peace, serve the Lord. Take a look at some of the things over here if you haven't gotten a chance, but thanks so much.